You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, we've got some bad news for Donald Trump here as one of his own longtime allies has just flipped on him. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, Jenna Ellis, who you might remember was one of Donald Trump's lawyers, and she was partnered up with Rudy Giuliani. They did a little road show down in Georgia, if you'll recall, when they lied to Georgia state legislators trying to, undo the election results down in Georgia. That didn't work out so well for either Jenna Ellis or Rudy Giuliani because they were both indicted down in Georgia. And whereas Rudy intends to go to trial, Jenna Ellis pleaded guilty. She flipped. She's cooperating against all of the other defendants down in Georgia, and that includes Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump, and several others. Well, now we learned that she has also flipped out in Arizona. She decided that she would cooperate with Arizona state prosecutors in a mega case that they brought against 18 criminal defendants who were part of the fake elector scheme and the scheme to overturn and attack the election results in Arizona. So here's the thing. She didn't plead guilty to any charges out in Arizona the way she did in Georgia when she flipped. Instead, the Georgia state authorities gave her essentially what's called a non-pros agreement, a non-prosecution agreement. They said, listen, if you tell us the truth about the crimes of others about which you know, Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump, remember Mark Meadows, former chief of staff, is also criminally indicted out in Arizona. If you agree to testify truthfully against all of those other people, we will dismiss your indictment. We will get rid of all 9 felony charges. Now, let me tell you, Brian, prosecutors don't typically like to enter into this kind of an agreement. Why? Because if you give somebody with 9 felony charges a pass, and then you put them on the stand at the trial of, Rudy Giuliani, for example, she will be cross-examined mightily by Rudy Giuliani's defense attorney, along the lines of, wait a minute, Miss Ellis, you were facing a bunch of years in prison, but these prosecutors over here got rid of all 9 of your felony charges if you would testify against my client. You're going to say anything these prosecutors want you to say to make it seem like my client committed crimes. Isn't that right? That's why prosecutors typically don't like to give out non-pros agreements. We like people to take responsibility for their crimes, plead guilty to their crimes, maybe reduced charges, and maybe with a sentencing cap or agreement that keeps their exposure low, and then put them on the witness stand against, to testify against others. However, there are times where prosecutors make the decision, and I've done this myself, it's more important to acquire the incriminating evidence they have against somebody else than it is to make them plead guilty to their own crimes, because maybe they were a bit player. Maybe they were acting at the direction of somebody else, like Rudy Giuliani, Mark Meadows, or even Donald Trump. So, these can be challenging arrangements to strike with a witness like Jenna Ellis, but I trust the Arizona state court prosecutors did what they believed was right. And here's how we guard against having this kind of a deal come back to bite us, having it really damage the witness's credibility. We will put the witness before the grand jury under oath and get all of the testimony locked in, and we can use that transcript at a future trial to make sure that the witness has good information, accurate information, information that can be corroborated by other sources. So you're not just taking Jenna Ellis's word for everything alone when you're giving her this sweetheart deal. So that's the way you can bolster a witness's credibility when you make the difficult decision that you're going to dismiss all charges against her if she agrees to testify about the crimes of others.
Now, Glenn, this is happening in Arizona. As far as I'm aware, Donald Trump hasn't been indicted in Arizona, even though Rudy Giuliani and Mark Meadows have, and these people are very clearly in Donald Trump's orbit. Why do you think that we haven't heard about a Trump indictment?
I think prosecutors, before indicting a former president of the United States, they want their I's triple dotted and their T's, quadruple crossed, and maybe they're waiting for more cooperating witnesses like the Jenna Ellises of the, this sad affair out in Arizona to come on board, go in the grand jury, lock her testimony in so she can't walk away from it later, and then make the decision that, okay, we've got enough solid, corroborated evidence about the crimes of Donald Trump that we are ready to drop an indictment on him. So, don't be surprised if in the coming days or weeks, now that they have Jenna Ellis in their stable as a cooperating witness, it could be that we see an Arizona state indictment of Donald Trump, just like we saw one in Georgia for what he did in connection with, trying to overturn the results of the Georgia state election.
Do you think it's possible that Arizona is kind of keeping its powder dry and waiting to see how it shakes out in the very similarly situated Georgia RICO prosecution to see whether they move forward with an indictment against Donald Trump?
That could be, but, from my perspective as a former career prosecutor, I would certainly be interested in how similarly situated cases were unfolding with respect to one of the defendants I was contemplating indicting, but I would assess the facts and the evidence in my case really largely without regard of how things are unfolding in other cases or the timing of trials in other cases. And when the time was right for me to drop an indictment on a former president of the United States, I think I would do it without regard to the status of cases in other jurisdictions.
Well, let me ask you this then, which is a similar question, but not exactly the same. Do you think that they might be taking into account the election results before they bother putting forward an indictment, knowing full well that Donald Trump will present some perverted, distorted interpretation of the supremacy clause to avoid prosecution even in Arizona state?
I would hope not. Can I rule it out? No, because, attorneys general and secretaries of state and governors obviously are political actors. And to, pretend that they can and do always divorce all politics from the prosecutorial equation, the prosecutorial decisions they have to make would probably be a little naive. So I hope they wouldn't just be waiting for an election, because I think that does a disservice to their responsibility to bring, in a timely manner, bring prosecutions for violations of state law, particularly state election laws, because who are the victims? The voters of Arizona. So right. I hope it's not that kind of a political calculation going on out there.
And finally, let's end with this. What kind of an impact do you think that this burgeoning case against, Donald Trump's orbit out in Arizona might have on impending attempts by Trump-aligned folks and Trump acolytes and mouthpieces to interfere in the 2024 election? Do you think that this will dissuade them or push them away from doing the same thing that they did in 2020, now that we're actually seeing prosecutions take off?
Well, in a perfect world, in a normal world, of course, we seem to be living in the legal and political upside down here.
Yeah.
When you prosecute certain kinds of crime, it tends to deter others from committing the same or similar crimes. That's the way deterrence is supposed to work.
And
do
yet,
I have any hope that the Donald Trump's sycophants and lapdogs and flunkies will be deterred? You know what? It might have the opposite effect. They might be so desperate, they might know that if their man doesn't get elected in November, and he won't, that a whole bunch of them are going to have even bigger problems than they have right now. Maybe they will ratchet up their criminal efforts to try to do everything they can to have Donald Trump steal yet another election.
Right. That's a great point, and further underscores why it is so important for us to get out and vote. And if you're worried about these prosecutions, if you're despairing over what feels like a lack of accountability for Donald Trump, this is how we get that accountability. Because let's be clear, if Donald Trump is able to win in November, he will do everything within his power to make sure that he doesn't face any accountability whatsoever. So this is the first step. This is our role here in making sure that Donald Trump does face some accountability. That's making sure that we turn out, to Glenn's point, again, using Glenn's words, in numbers too big to rig and too real to steal. So we will, of course, stay on top of this Arizona indictment as this continues to play itself out. For those watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.